Hello and welcome, and a very happy 75th Independence Day. On the 5th of August, 2 weeks ago, a team from NewsX and our network, the ITV network, was at Lal Chowk in Srinagar in an iconic ceremony in which we flew the Indian flag and sang the Indian national anthem. Lal Chowk in Srinagar. It takes us back into history. And for me, it is partly a very personal and emotional journey. It was the summer of 2000. I was a young student in class 9, and I was in the Kasauli cantonment in Himachal Pradesh, sitting in the Kasauli club in the foyer, and I was reading this book. This book is called The Making and Unmaking of British India. It's by Lawrence James. And there was an old elderly gentleman with a walking stick walking past me. He was from Mumbai. It seems very recently, but it was 22 years ago. I don't remember his name. And he saw me reading this. He came the next day and gifted me another book. And this is a reprint. The book is called The Integration of the Indian States by V.P. Menon. V.P. Menon, seen here, standing with Sardar Patel, who was the minister of the States Ministry, which no longer exists now, was the key man on the spot in Srinagar in the October of 1947. He is the man who flew in to get the instrument of accession signed. And he writes about it. And I remember as a young teenager reading this. I'm going to read it out. This is page 356 on the chapter on Jammu and Kashmir from V.P. Menon's book. The all-out invasion of Kashmir started on 22nd October 1947. The main raiders column, which had approximately 200 to 300 lorries and which consisted of frontier tribesmen estimated at 5,000, Afridis, Wazirs, Masoods, Swathis and soldiers of the Pakistani army on leave, led by some regular officers who knew Kashmir well, advanced from Abbottabad in the NWFP along the Jhelum Valley Road. They captured Gari and Domal and arrived at the gates of Muzaffarabad. He goes on to write, the raiders then marched towards Baramulla along the road leading to Srinagar, their next destination being Uri. When Brigadier Rajendra Singh, the Chief of Staff of the State Forces, heard of the desertion of the Muslim personnel and the advance of the raiders, he gathered together approximately 150 men and moved towards Uri. There, he engaged the raiders for 2 days and in rearguard action destroyed the Uri bridge. The brigadier himself and all his men were cut to pieces in this action. But he and his colleagues will live in history like the gallant Leonidas and his 300 who held the Persian invaders at Thermopylae. It was but appropriate that when the Mahavir Chakra decoration was instituted, the first award should have been given posthumously to this heroic soldier. This was my very personal introduction one summer more than 2 decades ago, very briefly, to Brigadier Rajendra Singh. Here I am, 22 years later, the editor of a news channel. And I owe it to my generation and generations after me that this story be told and recognized in a whole new light. Had Brigadier Rajendra Singh, and it's difficult to understand this as civilians, when you receive an order to fight to the last bullet and to the last man, what that actually means. Let me read out his Mahavir Chakra citation. At 800 hours on the 22nd of October, a message was received at Army Headquarters JNK SF from OC4 JNK to the effect that Domel camp had been heavily attacked from all sides. There were very few TPS in Srinagar troops. Brigadier Rajendra Singh, who was acting Chief of Staff of the State Forces, took out a contingent of 2 mortar and set from Srinagar about 1800 hours during heavy downpour of rain. reaching Uri by midnight. On morning of 23rd October 47, the contingent was supplemented by 2 sections from 7 JNK and advanced towards Domel. At a place about quarter of a mile short of Gadi, the contingent was heavily engaged by the enemy and lost about a platoon killed or wounded. The pressure of the enemy increased and the column was forced to withdraw to a place 3 or 4 miles from Gadi. The enemy greatly outnumbered our little force and it was impossible to hold out. The contingent then withdrew towards Baramulla. Brigadier Rajendra Singh managed to signal back and received a reinforcement consisting of 1 section MMG and 1 detachment 3 mortar by night. He again reorganized the column and pushed towards Uri, reaching there early morning on 24th October 47, destroyed the Uri bridge and went into defensive position, fully determined to fight the enemy to the last. In the afternoon of the same day, the enemy appeared and opened up with automatics. Very heavy fire was exchanged for 4 hours and the column was forced to withdraw to Mahura, where a stand was made until 1500 hours on the 25th of October, when the column was again forced back to Rampur, the enemy following closely. The brigadier managed to dig in the defensive position under cover of darkness and gave fight to the enemy till 0200 hours on 26th October. When forced to abandon the position because his TPS, his troops had suffered very heavily, the brigadier planned to withdraw to an already reconnoitred position in the rear. He had hardly covered a distance of 200 yards when he received an IMG burst hitting his right arm and right leg. Although seriously wounded, he continued to inspire his men to fight on and delay the enemy advance as far as possible. Being one of the last few to leave the position, the brigadier was rendered helpless and fell into the hands of the enemy, never to be heard of again. His personal example, leadership of high order, indomitable courage and determination to fight against heavy odds, born of a high sense of duty to serve, inspired the small force to fight to the last, thereby delaying the advance of the enemy hordes for 3 days. Let's that sink in. Let's open up this telecast as a tribute to the Saviour of Kashmir, Brigadier Rajendra Singh and his 150 troops, because the 2.5 days they bought gave enough time for an air supply, air landing of troops in Srinagar, which began on the 26th of October, the evacuation, including incidentally, of the man who wrote this book, VP Menon, who was in Srinagar with the Maharaja at that point of time. It is a rare privilege for us to have with us on this telecast Brigadier Rajendra Singh's daughter Usha Parmar. She was there with the family in Srinagar when his father got the orders from the Maharaja to hold the road to Srinagar to the last man. That was the order. We also have with us Dr. Karan Singh, the son of the late Maharaja Hari Singh, who was also there in Srinagar and remembers the time as a young child. Colonel Divya Thakur, grandson of Brigadier Rajendra Singh, who also served in the forces with us. Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, he was former brigade commander in Uri and the GOC of Baramulla, and all the areas that we're talking about here came under his operational command at a particular time. Major General Govinder Singh Jamwal, who is president of the JNK Ex-Services League and has been working hard to get Brigadier Rajendra Singh due recognition, is with us on the telecast, as is Lieutenant General KJ Singh. He was the former Army Commander, GOC-NC Western Command. Usha ji, namaste. Very happy Independence Day to you, ma'am, and thank you so much. It's a rare pleasure and privilege, ma'am, to have an interaction with you. Let me ask the most basic question, Usha ji. What was, ma'am, the first memory of your father, the late great Brigadier Rajendra Singh?
बापूजी एक डिसिप्लिनेरियन थे और उनको ये बहुत अच्छा लगता था कि सारा दिन तो सब अपने अपने रहते हैं अलग से, कोई स्कूल कॉलेज या वो ऑफिस में होते थे, तो कहीं भी मिल नहीं पाते थे। पर शाम का डिनर वो चाहते थे कि सारा परिवार इकट्ठा होके एक जगह खाएं, ताकि उनकी सबकी बातें, स्कूल में क्या हुआ, कॉलेज में क्या हुआ, या किसने कहाँ पे क्या किया, ये सब जानना चाहते थे। और एक उनका ये था कि उनकी फेवरेट पोएम चार्ज ऑफ द लाइट ब्रिगेड, उनका वो था कि वो ट्यून को वो हमेशा जब कभी नहाते हुए चलते फिरते वो उसको
हाँ जी,
करते थे, विसल करते थे।
he used to whistle it in true army fashion. उषा जी, आपका आपका जन्म कब हुआ? कब आप श्रीनगर पे रीलोकेट हुई अपनी फैमिली के साथ, अपने पिताजी के साथ?
बापूजी की पोस्टिंग्स तो श्रीनगर होती रहती थी, से कभी श्रीनगर कभी जम्मू, एंड आई वाज बोर्न इन श्रीनगर इन 1938 सितंबर 6। और जब हमने शिफ्ट किया है तो बापूजी के साथ अगर शिफ्ट किया है,
हाँ जी।
तो जब उनकी वो पोस्टिंग श्रीनगर आई थी तब हम आए थे।
हाँ जी। अब उषा जी, क्या यादें हैं आपकी, योर चाइल्डहुड इन श्रीनगर बिफोर इंडिपेंडेंस, बिफोर पार्टीशन? क्या यादें थी ग्रोइंग अप टिल, आप करीबन 9-10 साल की थी जब इंडिपेंडेंस हुआ, 47 आया?
वो मेरी सबसे बेस्ट मेमोरीज थी। बापूजी के साथ जब हम श्रीनगर गए तो हम वाया रावलपिंडी गए, ये उनकी लास्ट पोस्टिंग थी श्रीनगर की। और जब हम श्रीनगर में रहे हैं, जहाँ पे उनका वो जहाँ पे उनकी रेजिडेंस थी, वहाँ के वो जो 3-4 साल हमने गुजारे, वो हमारे सबसे अच्छे मेमोरेबल डेज थे। हमारी वहाँ एक ही फैमिली थी, मतलब हम 4-5 बहनें और मेरी मदर, और वो बिल्कुल अकेला घर था पहाड़ी के नीचे। पर हमने कभी भी लोनली फील नहीं किया। हम बहनें हमेशा इकट्ठी रहीं, घूमना फिरना। मैं तो बहुत छोटी थी, पर फिर भी मैं सबके साथ चिपकी रहती थी।
तो खबर कब मिली?
वही मेरा सबसे अच्छा टाइम।
उषा जी, खबर कब मिली आपको जब 15 अगस्त आया, इंडिपेंडेंस हुई? श्रीनगर में उस टाइम कन्फ्यूजन था। आपको याद है कि आपको खबर कैसे मिली, कब मिली अबाउट इंडिपेंडेंस?
एक्चुअली मैं उस वक्त 9 साल की थी, तो ऐसा कोई बहुत ज्यादा मैं नहीं बता पाऊंगी आपको कि क्या मेमोरीज थी उस वक्त की, क्योंकि उस टाइम पे फैमिलीज को इन चीजों के लिए कोई भी इंक्लूड नहीं करता था।
आपकी यादें क्या हैं श्रीनगर में? आप कह रही थी आप 9 साल की थी, सो इट विल बी फेंट मेमोरीज। वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट the early 40s. You said you were born in Srinagar in 1938. But महाराजा हरी सिंह, उनके बेटे करण जो हमारे साथ हैं आज, जो महल था वहाँ पर पोस्टिंग का, the barracks, the cantonment, what are your memories, ma'am?
Actually, अगर आप मुझसे पूछें तो बहुत प्लेजेंट मेमोरीज नहीं थी, ना है, क्योंकि उनको हमारी फैमिली का सारा पता था। वो सब जानते थे इस फैमिली के, उनके क्लोज ऑफिसर थे ये, और किसके कितने फैमिली मेंबर्स हैं, क्या है। पर जब बापूजी नहीं रहे तो उन्होंने कभी बॉदर नहीं किया कि वो जानने की कोशिश करें कि हम कैसे हैं। मेरी माँ ने उनसे मिलने की कोशिश भी की, पर उनके पास मेरी माँ के लिए टाइम नहीं था। तो आप सोच सकते हैं कि मुझे मेरा क्या एक्सपीरियंस है उस टाइम का उनके साथ।
ऑलमोस्ट हार्ट ब्रेकिंगली डिसअपॉइंटिंग। आपकी मदर की हम फोटोग्राफ दिखा रहे हैं जब जनरल करियप्पा श्रीनगर गए थे उनको एमबीसी साइटेशन हैंड ओवर करने के लिए। ब्रेव मदर, एंड आई वांट टू टॉक टू यू अबाउट योर मदर ऑल्सो। बट उषा जी, डू यू रिमेंबर राइट बिफोर अक्टूबर 1947, डू यू रिमेंबर द लास्ट इंटरैक्शंस विथ योर फादर?
उस दिन 22 अक्टूबर थी।
हाँ जी।
मेरे और नवरात्रों के दिन चल रहे थे।
अच्छा।
मेरे फादर घर पे नहीं थे, और वो हर साल पूजा करते थे, वो देवी भक्त थे। और हमारे घर में हमेशा नवरात्रों की पूजा होती थी। और जब नवमी को वो
हाँ जी,
हवन होता था,
हाँ जी।
तो वो खुद बैठते थे पूजा में। पर उस दिन वो वहां पे नहीं थे। और बड़ी हश हश टोन में बात हो रही थी कि कोई कुछ भी नहीं बोल रहा था, जैसे जैसे सन्नाटा सा छाया हुआ था हमारे घर में।
हम्म।
और बापूजी काफी देर से आए, कोई 1:30-2 बजे के करीब आए। और उन्होंने आते ही कहा कि खाना दे दो। खाना खाने बैठे वो। और एज यूजुअल मैं उनके साथ हमेशा उनकी थाली में खाना खाती थी, उनके साथ शेयर करती थी। उस दिन भी मैं उनके साथ बैठ गई। पर वो तो बहुत जल्दी उठ गए वहां से, और मैं खाती रह गई। मुझे ये नहीं पता था कि वो मेरा लास्ट मील था उनके साथ। मैं उसके बाद उन्होंने उठ के अपना सामान इकट्ठा करना शुरू किया। और साथ में वो मेरी माँ को बोलते जा रहे थे कि मुझे शायद 4-5 दिन लग जाए। और मेरी माँ ने पूछा कि तो मैं क्या करूंगी, कि तुम जो ठीक समझोगी वो करना। आप सोच सकते हो कि मेरी माँ पर्दे में रही हमेशा, पढ़ी लिखी भी ज्यादा नहीं थी। और उनके लिए वो जवाब कैसा रहा होगा, उनको कैसा फील हुआ होगा कि अब मैं क्या करूंगी, कैसे देखूंगी इतने बच्चों को। उसके बाद उन्होंने अपनी स्टिक, और उन्होंने सॉरी
प्लीज टेक इट।
मेरी माँ ने मेरी सिस्टर्स को कहा कि आप थोड़े से बादाम और वो ड्राई फ्रूट्स इनकी जेब में डाल दो, क्योंकि क्या पता अभी इन्होंने खाया भी नहीं कुछ, और कब मिलेगा, कैसा मिलेगा। और बापूजी ने अपनी स्टिक और अपनी टोपी उठाई, और वो ही जस्ट वॉकड आउट। ना उन्होंने वापस मुड़ के हमको देखा, ना हमको किसी को सिर पे हाथ फेरा। ऐसा लगता है जैसे उनको उस सिचुएशन का पता था कि ही विल नॉट बी कमिंग बैक अगेन।
Almost left with his cap and his stick. You know, your son was gracious enough to share the photograph of his cap, which we're showing on our screen, but he left with his cap and his swagger stick. When did you get news, ma'am, about what had happened in Uri? Over the next 2 days?
कुछ ऑफिसर्स जो हमारे थे जान पहचान के, उन्हीं के थ्रू हमको पता चला। ऐसे कोई ऑफिशियल लेटर आया हो उसके बारे में मैं नहीं बता सकूंगी, क्योंकि मैं तो उस वक्त बहुत छोटी थी।
There was no official news. You heard it from those who had been left behind. I was mentioning आपकी मदर रामदेवी जी, हम फोटोग्राफ दिखा रहे हैं वहाँ पर, जब जनरल करियप्पा was then Lieutenant General. He became India's first field marshal. And he led after this the removal of the raiders from large parts and played a historic role in Kashmir as well, which also many of us in a new generation have mostly forgotten. Five of you, Ushadi, five daughters. I'm assuming it was difficult for your mother going ahead after this. How was the experience? Tell us about your sisters. Tell us about your mom.
मेरी माँ में वो स्ट्रेंथ कहाँ से आई, मैं हैरान होती हूँ। जो कभी पढ़ी लिखी नहीं, जिसने कभी पर्दे से बाहर देखा नहीं, वो कहाँ से इतनी स्ट्रांग हो गई कि उसने अपनी 4 लड़कियों को पढ़ाया लिखाया, उनकी देखभाल की, जबकि उनको गाइड करने वाला कोई नहीं था। मैं सोचती हूँ कि जब बापूजी के बारे में उन्होंने सुना होगा तो उनको कैसा लगा होगा। ऐसा लगा होगा ना कि जैसे वो बिना दुपट्टे के चौराहे पे खड़ी हैं और सारी दुनिया उनको देख रही है, जिसने कभी घूंघट से बाहर मुंह नहीं निकाला।
Take your time.
फिर भी वो हमको बहुत हिम्मत देती थी। वो कभी हमारे सामने बापूजी को याद करके नहीं रोई। कभी मैंने उनको रोते हुए देखा है तो पूजा गृह में। पूजा घर उनका एक छोटा सा बना हुआ था जहाँ पूजा करती थी। अक्सर मैं उनको वहां रोते हुए देखती थी, पर हमारे सामने वो कभी नहीं रोई। उन्होंने कभी बापूजी को याद नहीं किया, शायद इसलिए कि शायद हम भी टूट जाएंगे। पर हम तो यंग थे, शायद टूटते ना, पर उन्होंने कैसे वो स्ट्रेंथ लगाई मुझे नहीं पता। मैं
Usha ji,
हैरान होती।
what is then the lesson from both your heroic and brave parents?
यही रही है कि चाहे आपका कोई ना साथ दे, पर एक शक्ति तो ऐसी है जो हमेशा आपके साथ है।
हमेशा अपने साथ। उषा जी, 75 साल हो गए ऑलमोस्ट नाउ। October 22nd, 1947 is when you last shared a meal with your father, not knowing what would happen next. For a new generation, ma'am, आज की नई पीढ़ी के लिए, for the lesson of bravery and heroism and self-sacrifice, अब हम किताबों में पढ़ते हैं, अब वो भी खैर पता नहीं क्या कितना पढ़ते हैं हम. What would be the lesson, ma'am, that you would like to draw from this very historic life?
मैं यही कह सकती हूँ कि अपनी ड्यूटी पूरी सिंसेरिटी के साथ और बिना किसी एक्सपेक्टेशंस के करनी चाहिए.
With full sincerity and without any expectation. Usha ji, आपको प्रणाम and my thanks, ma'am, for sitting with us. And I know these are painful memories to bring up again, but these are stories that desperately need to be told to a younger India, ma'am, where there are 650 million who are younger than me. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Let me bring in Dr. Karan Singh. Dr. Karan Singh, thanks for taking out the time to have this conversation. I know it's a difficult and painful one in all circumstances, as it was for your family as well at that point of time, watching all of this unfold. I've been told, Dr. Karan Singh, that you were there, sir, at the time the order was given to to Brigadier Rajendra Singh to hold the road to Srinagar. Do you remember that moment, sir?
You see, Brigadier Rajendra Singh was my father's chief of army staff.
Yes.
A very fine officer. And I recall my memory, very clear memory. This must have been, I think, early in October, when he came, he called Brigadier Rajendra Singh to the palace.
Yes.
And I was in the room when the Brigadier came in. I happened to be in a wheelchair, unfortunately, but nonetheless I was there. And he came in and he saluted my father and saluted me and sat down. And my father said to him, Rajendra Singh, the situation is not good. You have to fight till the last man and the last bullet. And he said, yes, Your Highness, I will do that. He got up and saluted us and walked out. I remember that very vividly. And then after that, as you know, the rest is history. He held them up at Uri for 48 critical hours. Otherwise, the airport could well have fallen to the raiders, and that would have been the end of the story. So we owe a great deal to Brigadier Rajendra Singh.
Dr. Karan Singh, it is obviously a tense atmosphere, sir. When did you first get news? Do you recall? A couple of days later of the heroic last stand at Uri? When did you first hear about it after it happened?
Well, I think by then we had moved down to Jammu, and I think it was there that we got the news that he had been martyred. And my father, of course, was very upset, and so were we. but he fulfilled his duty to the very end.
Yeah, so yeah, the 26th October, I remember, at least what Mr. Menon wrote about leaving with you and the family from Srinagar. Dr. Karan Singh, how dire were the consequences, sir? Had he not done what he did at that point of time and delayed the enemy at Uri for 48 hours, is it safe to say, sir, that he helped save Srinagar from occupation?
I think so, and by saving Srinagar, he saved the whole of Kashmir. Because if Srinagar had fallen, then that was the end of the whole of Kashmir would have been occupied by the raiders from Pakistan. Jammu may have been saved, but Kashmir would have gone. So I think it's correct to say that he was, in a way, the savior of Kashmir.
Okay, we just spoke with his daughter, Usha ji, sir. What can be done, sir, to recognize both his and his family's contribution to exactly what you just told us, saving Srinagar and thereby saving Kashmir?
You know, he had 5 daughters. I remember them well, and I knew most of them. They were married. I don't know how many are surviving now. But we have made, mind you, in his village there's a portrait of him in Jammu. When you enter, there's a statue of him. The government of India, I think, could have done more. He got a Mahavir Chakra, didn't he?
Yes, in 53, sir, yes.
He got a Mahavir Chakra. And I don't know whether with that there was any financial reward or anything. But there was, I think, a stamp has been issued in his honor.
Yes.
I think so. I'm not entirely sure. I think
yes,
it has,
yes.
Been. I remember when George Fernandes was minister, we had a meeting in the defense ministry about Brigadier Rajendra Singh, and 1 or 2 of his daughters were also present.
Would you support? Yeah.
So he will be remembered as one of the one of the earliest martyrs.
Would you support, sir,
battle.
the rarest and ultimate recognition, the Bharat Ratna, for the Brigadier?
Well, I don't know. Frankly, you know, military people, normally Bharat Ratna is for civilians, not really for army people. Army people, the highest honor is Paramveer Chakra. He could have got that. Mahavir Chakra is the second one, and the highest is the Paramveer Chakra. I don't think the Bharat Ratna is a reasonable proposition.
Okay, so it's the Paramveer Chakra then?
Really for civilian people.
Okay.
But Brigadier Rajendra Singh could well have got a Paramveer Chakra.
Okay.
I don't know whether he can posthumously get a Paramveer Chakra.
Yes,
or not.
He can. So let's take up that thought.
Decide whether that is possible.
Dr. Karan Singh, before I let you go, sir, from this story, which you were as a young child witness to part of, on the 75th year of our independence, what's the lesson to a new generation, sir?
We can all learn the importance of doing our duty literally till the last breath, and that's what our soldiers are taught to do, and that's what thousands and thousands of soldiers have done since 1975, officers and soldiers. In Kargil, how many young officers were martyred? That is a tradition in the Indian Army, and that was the tradition in our Jammu and Kashmir state forces. Brigadier Rajendra Singh was in the Jammu Kashmir state forces, remember?
Yes.
Not in the Indian Army at that time. The army had not even come in. So all our state forces and our forces fought in the Second World War in various places outside of India, and we have that tradition also. And that is I mean, we are Dogras. Dogras are a fighting community.
Yes.
And I produced a large number of very fine officers who have dedicated their lives and often given up their lives for the country. And that's what we can learn, and that's what young people should learn on this very auspicious 75th anniversary of our independence.
Okay. Dr. Karan Singh, I appreciate your time and thank you for joining us on this very important tribute. Let me get in quickly. Colonel Divya Thakur. Colonel, thanks very much for your patience in hearing out everybody else. We have a couple of other people waiting, but just for the record, sir, can you Colonel Divya Thakur, can you hear me, sir? Okay, if you could help us understand, Colonel Divya Thakur, how is it? What was your filial family relation, sir, with Brigadier Rajendra Singh?
Yeah, okay. I'm Colonel Divya Thakur. I have served in the army for 37 years. Now, Brigadier Rajendra Singh Jamwal, MBC posthumous, was my maternal grandfather. And as we all know that he was a recipient of the first gallantry award post-independence. Now, he had 5 daughters. My mother was the third in the hierarchy. She is no more. She was married to, again, an army officer. My father was an army officer. And I have an elder brother who has served in the army. I have an elder sister whose husband has also served in the army. So that's a brief introduction.
Yeah, so your father was in the army, grandfather was, of course, from the maternal side, Brigadier Rajendra Singh. Brigadier Rajendra Singh's father and grandfather were all armed forces men. What are your memories, sir, that your mother shared about your grandfather?
Oh, well, my mother was a very kind of a reserved person. She hardly talked about her father for whatever reasons. And, I've served in the Armored Corps. So in the Armored Corps, you mostly are familiar with the historical battles, which are mechanized warfare.
Yes.
So whatever I have learnt about those 4 days of war which my grandfather went through in October 1947 is through the various publications and the books. And the most detailed account, I would say, and I would put it on record, is in the book which is titled as Valor and Betrayal, which has been written by Major General Rajinder Singh Jamwal, who was a very close associate of my
He's with us. He's with us as we speak, yes.
From whatever my mother, she spoke, or my maternal aunts, they spoke to me or in the family, whatever conversation they had. 3 attributes I would like to share with my viewers. 3 attributes of my grandfather. The first one was he was very hardworking and meticulous, and he had exceptional oratory skills. The second was he was intrepid, fearless, resolute, and a dauntless military leader, which is actually, the 4 days war is a testimony to that effect. And as he grew in service, he was commissioned in 1921.
Yes.
And as he grew in service, he had mastered the art of soldiering and leadership, which is, evident from the volunteering that he did for fighting that battle, and then mustering the reservists which were there at the Army Bagh cantonment, taking them forward, motivating them, and fighting a 4 days battle, which is history now. 2 things more I would like to share with my viewers.
Yes, please go ahead.
The first is that Brigadier Rajendra Singh Jamwal was already approved for Major General, and he was about to pick up in the next about 4 or 5 days before he went to war. And I don't think, whatever little knowledge I have of the historical battles that have been fought in India, there is an officer of such a high rank who has fought with the soldiers shoulder to shoulder and in the trenches for 4 days. So the second aspect I would like to share is that, he was a very principled person. And on 2 occasions, he had tendered his resignation to the Maharaja at that particular time, and he was talked into rejoining.
Okay.
And twice he had rejoined before he went.
Colonel Thakur,
So these are the aspects I would like to share with my
Colonel Thakur,
viewers,
you know,
which all of them may not be aware of.
yes. So, Colonel Thakur, on that, on the fact that the awareness is required, what more can be done to recognize the contribution of your large family and him?
I will not say that something more should be done. In fact, a lot has already been done, and we take solace from the fact that my grandfather is called as the Saviour of Kashmir, which in itself is
Yes.
a recognition beyond anything else, whether it is MBC, PVC or any other thing.
Okay.
And he had a persona, and he has a persona which is larger than life itself. And
Right.
we are all proud of it.
Okay. So, for a younger generation, sir, my generation and younger, what is the lesson to be learned from a hero like Brigadier Rajendra Singh?
I would say that the primary lesson to be learned from my grandfather is that you must do your duty with dedication and a strong commitment to the rightful cause, irrespective of the impediments or adversities that may come in your chosen.
And what would your message be, sir, on this 75th Independence Day for people watching this telecast?
Freedom has been given to our country. It has been inherited by us. It has been given to most of us because it's been now 75 years. It's been given to us on a platter. Therefore, we are obliged to uphold it and to safeguard it with internal and external relation.
Okay.
At this time, when there's a lot of turmoil and turbulence everywhere, I would implore upon the youth of a country not to be swayed by inimical divide based on caste, creed, religion, and politics. And whatever job or profession you may be pursuing, do it with pride, zeal, and a commitment for strengthening our country and protecting its sovereignty and nationality.
Okay. Our gratitude and salute to you, sir, and your entire family going back 5 generations who've served the people of this land. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me now quickly thank the patience of the guests who've been sitting with us live. General Hasnain is with us, General Govardhan Singh Jamwal, whom Colonel Thakur, whose book he made reference to, is with us, and General KJ Singh is with us as well. General Hasnain, I'm just going to put some details on our screens, because let's go into the detail of what happened in Baramulla, Uri, around that sector between 22nd and the 25th of October. After the 26th, of course, was when the first planes, the Dakota, started landing in Srinagar, and Srinagar was saved. Those 2 days, we're putting out the map on our screen, sir. Can you just describe what was happening at that point of time?
Thank you, Rishabh. Thank you for having me on this show. It's an honor, absolutely, to be speaking on a national hero such as Brigadier Rajendra Singh Mahavir Chakra. I cannot see your map, but this area is absolutely etched in my mind since I have been the brigade commander at Uri and the GOC at Baramulla. Let me recount from the 22nd of October what really happened at this time. In fact, a little beyond that. When Brigadier Rajendra was given this order by Maharaja Hari Singh to go ahead and defend Srinagar at all costs, last man, last round, he went ahead. He could have, under normal circumstances, he could have made a small headquarter for himself at Baramulla and sent his troops ahead. But no, he went with the troops, and very correctly stated by his grandson, Colonel Divya Thakur, that it's a rarity to see a brigadier, a 1-star general at that time, actually involved in proper combat with his troops. There were not more than 150 men under his command. They went up to Gadi, fell back from there, came to Uri. At Uri, he gave battle again at a place called the Hyderabad Nala. I'm not sure whether it is.
Yeah, we're showing it on the map. We're showing it on the map.
Yeah. This was the place where he gave battle, Hyderabad Nala. The pillage of Uri took place around this time. There was such great frustration among the tribals that they pillaged the entire town of Uri. Thereafter, he was forced to fall back and he destroyed the bridge on the Hyderabad Nala. Today, that bridge is called the Narsingh Bridge, which is named on a JCO who was a Victoria Cross from 1st Sikh. As you're aware, 1st Sikh came into the battle at a later stage on the 27th of October.
Yes.
From there, Brigadier Rajendra decided to fall back to Mohra. And that's where his position was established. By that time, very, very few men were really left. It is around this area of the power station at Mohra. I'm not sure if it is marked there, the power station of the Mohra, a little town. That this is the place where he put up his deployment and decided to give battle. Now, what must be remembered in the course of this battle, what he was doing was he was preventing this road from getting opened. You see, otherwise the tribals had gone past from the other bank of the Jhelum, from around him. They had lots of tribals had already advanced beyond and already reached Baramulla. The important thing was to hold the vehicles there. Because without the vehicles, without the logistics, they wouldn't have been able to go beyond. So he gave battle to those who were trying to open the road at Mohra. And it is in the course of this last battle, major battle, which happened on the 26th, that he was martyred, very, very unfortunately. Literally a last man, last round kind of an action.
Let me just delve into that, sir, if I can. General KJ Singh, the one-line order, Brigadier Rajendra Singh is commanded to hold the enemy at all cost and to the last man. Now, for people watching this broadcast, majority will be civilians. To receive an order which is basically telling you and conveying it to a very limited force of 100, 150 people that, boys, this is it, and you just leave. They left at 6 p.m., they reached at about 2 a.m. To the areas that General Hussain was describing. It's obviously a difficult emotional moment under duress when you're being ordered to your death.
And see, you have to see it in the context that he was not an ordinary commander. He was the chief of J&K state forces. And you've heard Karan Singh, Maharaja Karan Singh, Excellency, that there was not even a discussion, there was not even a question that he was asking. Here is a man who knows that his force is down to this level. People, because of religious inclination, are revolting, or at Muzaffarabad, there had been a kind of a mutiny, and he says he is going to go. Otherwise, like what General Hussain was saying, he could have set up a headquarters and controlled from there, but he went right ahead. He was leading from the front. And in our narrative that we have had to prosecute later because of Pakistan's these actions, what better proof than this, that the chief of J&K state forces went there and fought for us and sacrificed his life. So where is the doubt that what is the people of Jammu?
Okay, this was an important moment, General KJ Singh, because, we all know and we've discussed, the accession document to death, okay? This was the time when Maharaja Hari Singh, Karan Singh's father, the late Maharaja of Kashmir, had not yet signed the accession document. This was the time when Menon and was flying into Srinagar. These were the crucial days, because it's only 3 or 4 days later now that the accession document is in VP Menon's hand. It's got the signature of the Maharaja of Kashmir, and he flies it back to Delhi. Mountbatten was, of course, the other one to sign it in Delhi. So these 3 or 4 days literally were crucial to the history of the subcontinent. And what he did in holding the enemy was crucial, because on 26th, the Dakotas landed in Srinagar airport.
And see, his legacy, I have had the privilege of looking after Jammu, Katwa, Samba, when Pakistan was trying to spread the terrorism over there and take this proxy war down. I have been to various villages, his village Baguna, other villages in the neighborhood. Today, people over there still revere him like a god. They respect him hugely. In Jammu also, universities got the hall named after him, Chowk is named after him, Badami Bagh. So his legacy carries on. And one thing more I would like to correct through you. He was the second Mahavir Chakra winner.
Right.
First was Nayak Raju. And that all happened because, see, there was no Western Command. I commanded Western Command. There was some ad hoc setup called as Delhi and East Punjab Command.
Yeah.
It was created to look after partition and its after effects.
No, we are talking about, I mean, the Auchinleck is still commander of the Indian Army. We're talking about a complicated time in the Indian Army, including its ammunition reserves, its hardware is still in the process of bifurcation. This is a very convoluted time. But you mentioned incidentally Muzaffarabad. Let me get Major General Govardhan Singh into this. General Singh, Govardhan Singh ji, let's talk about where it began. When these guys, there was a unit of the state forces in Muzaffarabad which suffered a mutiny, and the commanding officer, if I remember my history correctly, was shot. He was a colonel level commanding officer there. Can you just educate us what happened in the run up to these few days, 22nd October onwards, when the invasion begins, the next 2-3 days before the battle at Uri, sir? General Jamwal, if you can hear me, sir, please go ahead. Okay, let's get the audio check with him done and sorted out. We should have done this a few minutes before. General Hussain, let me take up that thought with you, because we've gotten independence on the 15th of August. There's no clarity. I'm just trying to put us back into historical context. Okay, you have Patel, you have Menon who's running around. There are 520 princely states. Okay. There is confusion in Hyderabad because the Razakars are raising a force to hold out. There is confusion in Goa. There is confusion in Pondicherry. There is still confusion in Junagadh. There was confusion at that point of time, which we don't talk about, in Balochistan, where the Balochis didn't want to join Pakistan. And there's confusion in Kashmir because the Maharaja simply is not making up his mind. He has some illusions of negotiating some sort of an autonomous setup at that point of time. Then the invasion begins. And the invasion was brutal. For people who want to read the history, read what happened in Mirpur, what happened in Baramulla, where everyone was massacred. There are a lot of Sikh families over there. The women were taken off into Rawalpindi and literally sold like slaves. There were busloads of people who were butchered and parked at the entrance of the towns as a warning to all these things. It's all recorded facts. Just reminder, General Hussain, the few days leading up to this, once the invasion begins.
Call here is that after partition, while all these states you just mentioned were dithering as to their decision, Jammu and Kashmir was one state which had actually called for a standstill agreement with Pakistan. Particularly with Pakistan, India was willing to give him time, but Pakistan, he had called for a standstill agreement, which Pakistan was also dithering all about. Of course, a lot of preparation had gone into this. There is a misapprehension among people that this invasion happened overnight. No. Right from the month of June, if you read Akbar Khan's book, that really brings it out very clearly. Akbar Khan is the man who actually led this whole invasion.
Yes.
And he is the man who writes that this preparation for this had begun from June, because they were expecting that there would be some kind of a problem as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. They wanted to make sure that the contiguity of states, as far as Pakistan was concerned, would be maintained. So they were particularly interested in Jammu and Kashmir, the linkages to the north with China, with Central Asia, etc. So it's because of that, with this kind of agreement, with this kind of preparation that they had done, that they created these Lashkars. And even as the assets between India and Pakistan, the two armies, were being exchanged, there were squadrons. General Kamaljeet will remember, squadrons of the armored corps which were moving from here to the Pakistan army.
Yes,
There were-
and General Hasan, there was British complicity. Auchinleck knew what was going on. He didn't brief the
Absolutely.
Indian command. He didn't brief Karyappa, who was then Lieutenant General.
Absolutely.
It was
The
Major
British
Brown
rule.
who gave Gilgit-Baltistan to the Pakistanis. Basically handed them
Absolutely.
over
The
after
British
killing.
complicity was very, very intense in this entire.
Yeah, so there was
But the-
complicity. So basically, from June onwards, with British complicity, they are planning this. This invasion is planned. They've sent their officers on leave to lead it.
Absolutely. But it is-
They
it is-
put them in mufti to do all of this. Yeah, finish your thoughts, sir. Yes.
Is that Muzaffarabad, Gomel Muzaffarabad, that the spark went off. That's where they instigated the revolt among the Muslim troops of the 4th Jammu and Kashmir Rifles, state forces, which later on became 4th Yakalai. But it's from there that this whole thing started. Their intention was very clear. I mean, there would be Lashkars who would be going in different directions,
Yes.
to Naushera, to Poonch, northwards, going up to Gilgit-Baltistan. But the one which was to come from Muzaffarabad along the Uri road, coming to Baramulla and Srinagar, was the most important one.
Okay,
It is
so
this
let's
which
put the
would bring
puzzle
it to
pieces
the
together.
airfield.
General KJ
Yeah.
Singh, by this time, Muzaffarabad, Mirpur, the massacres, Baramulla, these are already taking place. They're all in the process of taking place. A massacre is happening there. There is nothing to stop these forces because most of the state forces have mutinied and rebelled. As I mentioned in Muzaffarabad, there was a mutiny. The appointee officer there of the state forces was killed. Now, at this point of time, Brigadier Rajendra Singh buys us the 2 days. The second heroic operation, of course, happens with the Dakotas that flew in. And, for people watching this broadcast, Biju Patnaik, the current Naveen Patnaik, Odisha Chief Minister's father, was one of the first to fly one of the Dakotas into Srinagar, which was another historic, amazing airlift operation immediately after the Second World War. So in these 3 or 4 days, between Uri and Srinagar, to the time that General Karyappa turns all of this around, these are iconic battles, and potentially, had a political decision not been taken, we could have reoccupied all of the state.
Rishabh, see, there is some amount of this thing. Some people say he bought us 2 days, but actually he bought us 4 days. If you logically analyze, he bought us 4 days. And this narrative of what we talk about defense of Jammu and Kashmir before we close, just going little off the subject, 1 year down the line, less than 1 year down the line, 9 months later, Brigadier Mohammad Usman gets up, stands up, and saves Naushera. So here is a very great story which emerged from this fight back, which India put up. And this narrative that Pakistan has tried to build is so foolish because here Brigadier Rajendra went to rally his forces and Brigadier Usman stood up. So these are the tigers Indian Army has built their legacy on.
Yeah, I've done a separate telecast of Brigadier Usman a few months ago, incidentally. I'm going to try to get in General Jambal. Can you hear me, sir? If you can hear me, just describe to us, General.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, just describe to us, sir, the few days leading up to the battle in Uri, sir. From Muzaffarabad, when the mutiny took place, to Uri, as you mentioned in your book. Just describe them to us, please.
Well, you want me to describe the Battle of Muzaffarabad, which Brigadier was not there, or from the time the first contact took place?
From that point onwards.
Give you briefly, actually, it is important, as General KJ said, that the Battle of Muzaffarabad is a very vital battle to understand as to what happened. This had been already arranged by them that the attack will be 2 days before Dussehra. What happens in that unit used to happen is that during Dussehra, the Hindus will get off for 3 days, and on Eid day, because it's a mixed battalion, half Hindu, half Muslim, both Dogras, and on the Eid day, the Muslims will give duty. In fact, this had been advised by Aslam son of our Brigadier Rahmatullah Khan, who was my earlier brigade commander, who was a citizen of J&K state. He was in Jammu that day, and Aslam had resigned from his unit for J&K after having been awarded military cross on the recommendation of his CO Colonel Narayan Singh, who was still commanding the battalion at Muzaffarabad. This the British had arranged it almost a year and a half back, and after making him resign in the state unit, he had taken him to 5 Div as a major intelligence major, where he was told how the plan of attack on J&K was made, whatever name given, Gulmarg, etc., etc. This planning started much earlier. The British probably had thought of it 1 year before. And that's how this man was taken from Fort J&K, who knew everything, and perhaps General Scott might have told them when Mountbatten had come with Ismay that unless you do the divide and rule or finish the battalion while sleeping, you will never reach. Fort J&K will never let you reach for 10 days anywhere near Srinagar.
Okay, so General Jambal,
So
what
that
you're
is the
saying, sir,
reason
General Jambal, what you're saying
this
is
D-Day.
that with British complicity, Lieutenant Colonel Narayan Singh was the one who was shot by his own troops.
Totally a
Major
British
Brown
attack,
does the mutiny
British planned attack.
in Gilgit.
Pakistanis were, of course, played into it.
And Major Brown then
It is
simultaneously does a mutiny in
even
Gilgit.
If you read Surinder Sarela, he was the ADC with the Mountbatten on that day, and he had smelt the rat. He left the army, joined the foreign affairs, and then he went to London. He delved into all the papers, and he has come out with a book.
Okay. Given the fact that this intelligence was not privy,
It was all done by the British. As a
General
part of the
General Jambal, given the fact that this intelligence was not available in detail to Brigadier Rajendra Singh, that 2 or 4 days of action in which he held back the supply chain and the forces, how important was this in the larger scheme of things, sir?
Actually, I tell you, this was the first war of our Indian war between Pakistan arranged by the British. This should have been studied. This war has not been even studied by the Indian Army also. Nobody has studied this war at all. They only start from the landing of the Indian Army. 5 days went by before the landing of the Indian Army. That is the most instructive part of it, most educative part of it. And what Brigadier Rajendra Singh has done, I can tell you, you combined Saragadi and Thermopylae. Both combined will not give you that whatever he obtained it. In Thermopylae, they still lost the capital of that country. But we didn't lose the capital. We lost really nothing. And the area was exactly Thermopylae. And Saragadi, those 21 people, excellent, they died. Now, do you know, on the 23rd morning, Brigadier Rajendra Singh fought the first battle of Gadi, which is not even talked about. I say Gadi battle was even more important than Udi. That gave us 8 hours. And Captain Prithi Singh, he charged on the 300 vehicles and captured their leading vehicle, brought it. Then, of course, that was a Pakistani marking, and our own boys, 2 platoons, which Brigadier Rajendra Singh was commanding at that very time, they finished that vehicle on the middle of the road, and all the tires were burst, and Pakistan could not move for 6 hours.
Such an important story to be told.
Those 6 hours were most vital in this war of J&K.
General,
if they had moved 6 hours, they would have probably caught Maharaj Hari Singh.
yeah, they were thinking that they'll be in Srinagar on the 26th morning. That never happened, and history changed. History changed. At this point of time, at this note, over these 3 or 4 days,
the contact took place.
and to a large credit to Brigadier Rajendra Singh. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been with us throughout this telecast, I thank you for your time. I thank General Jamwal, who's written extensively about this. You've heard General Hasnain. You heard General KJ Singh, people who've served in these areas. And this is what, for people in service, this is the inspiration, this is the teaching of history when regimental history is taught. And it should not just be about regimental history or about armed forces history. So I would beg you, go and read about what happened in Mirpur and Baramulla and what happened in Muzaffarabad and the mutiny of Major Brown and the British complicity in Gilgit-Baltistan. Go and read and speak about Brigadier Rajendra Singh, about Muhammad Usman. This is something we should all know, because for us to decide whither we go, we must know whence we came. My thanks to everyone, including the family members, for taking part in this tribute telecast. An hour was not enough. We should spend more time on it, and we will. But for now, thank you very much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.